Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Local Business Spotlight. My name is Diana Lockie, and I'm a local real estate agent here in the Cary and Apex areas. Today, we have a little bit of a different episode. Today, we don't have a business to feature, but I have a very special guest. This is George Scalco. He wrote his autobiography, so he's an author from Cary. And I'm very excited to feature this book. It's called The Leap of Faith, a memoir by Emanuele George Scalco. And pretty much this is his story of how he came to America in a very, very interesting way. You will be actually very surprised of what he went through coming here as a very young man. And now I just want to hear from him and welcome him to our this episode today. So welcome, George.
Hello.
And thank you for agreeing to do this interview. I'm very excited to have your book featured on my website. And so tell us first, where are you from?
Venice, Italy.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm from an island which is part of Venice called Giudecca.
Okay.
So that's the only island that belongs to Venice which does not have a bridge connecting to the rest of the city.
Okay. So how is the transportation then?
By boat. So that boat, there are several different boats: vaporetto, motoscafo, sandalo, gondola. So it's just, but there is a ferry that goes across the canal that separates Venice from Giudecca. And the reason why that canal is there and it's without a bridge is because most of the merchant ships that come in, or the passenger ship, has to go into the port of Venice, which is inland. And of course, the Venetians built it that way for protection from everybody else who wanted to destroy Venice.
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing place to grow up in. Yeah. So you grew up there, and your father was working on the merchant ships, right?
Yes, he was.
Yeah. And then you follow his footsteps.
Well, not really. My father was born on a small island in the middle of the Adriatic. It's called Silba, and there were only 1,000 people at that time, and they were very poor. They had a few sheep, a piece of ground. So there was a very, very hard life, and most of the people there were either fishermen or mariners. So he, at a young age, he embarked on a ship, a merchant ship, and then I don't know exactly how, but he came to Venice, and he stayed there. He met my mom, and they got married, and they had 4 children, actually 5. Mom passed after 3 months. And I was the second then of the survivors.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So you had a part of your life, like your childhood and your young adult in Venice, and then you moved to America. So when did you move to America?
1950. But
Okay.
I was on the ship. I became a merchant marine myself.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't trying to fashion myself after my dad because I didn't know his history, because he didn't speak much about his family when we were children. But so I became a merchant marine, and then left and I went to Africa first, Tunisia, then Senegal, and then to Brazil, Rio, Recife, Santos, and then we went up north, and we disembarked. We arrived went into the Chesapeake Bay, which is one of the longest bays in the world, as you know. and beautiful. And on Christmas Eve, we arrived in Baltimore. And so that was America, just, and I had a little familiarity with the United States because on board I read the Constitution. I had a little, very small book which contained the Constitution, so I familiarized myself a little bit with the government. But I was young. I was 17. But when after I got off the ship, and obviously there was the port, and I was just astounded that there were a row of houses with beautiful color lights. There were people walking in the street. The women, most of the women had a corsage, on their lapel, and they were all dressed up beautifully. And they all would greet each other, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. Of course, I didn't understand much of anything, but it was, and they all smiled. So that was really something that really impressed me a lot, because coming from Italy, right after the war, everybody had a long face, and who wanted to smile? So it was not, it was not a very happy place after the war, unlike before the war, which, my infancy was very nice. So, and so the impression that it gave me was as if I was, like when I was a kid, I read, I think, Pinocchio, and the Wonderland. I said, my God, this is unbelievable. In any case, we stayed there just a day. Then we had come from Rio de Janeiro, and the ship was laden with iron ore. And so we unloaded the iron ore in Baltimore, and then we proceeded to Norfolk and Newport News, which is down the bay a little bit south. And we got loaded with coal, and then we just traversed the Atlantic, and we first went to Hamburg, which was just still devastated from the war, the bombing. It was an incredible sight. And so we unloaded half of the ship, and then we went to Rotterdam in Holland, and emptied the ship out, and then I said, gee, now we're going to go back home. We were out for over a month, probably almost 2 months, and I was eager to get back home. But some of the folks on the ship, some of the mariners actually left to go back home, but I couldn't do it because
you were thinking about your family.
No, because my father helped me to get the job. It was very, very difficult to get a job in Italy because most of the Italian ships during the war, the war were just destroyed, and but through my father, I was able to get a job.
Yeah.
And I would have been ashamed to give up and go back.
Yeah.
So I stayed on. And we started crossing the Atlantic, and it was the winter, and the Atlantic, especially the North Atlantic, is very. The weather is very, very, I would say, terrible. And it was to the point where we ran out of water because we were late getting across and we didn't know where we were going. Finally, they told us we're going back to America. and we didn't know where or when we would have gotten there. In any case, we were late. We were most running out of food, so we used quite a bit of the canned stuff and bread. There was a type of bread called gaete, which is a very, very dry, almost like a dry pancake that you have to soak into the water to eat. So we were at that, and the desalination plant on the ship was not working because it wasn't maintained well. So people were really, upset because they didn't get the proper food, proper water. In any case, after 7 or 8 days, we got to Philadelphia. And so even though I was young and I left school in the middle of the 8th grade because I didn't like school. Don't look at me like that. And but I love geography and I love Latin, so I knew pretty much where Philadelphia was. So when we got to Philadelphia, we went, the crew normally, I was the youngest on the ship, so, and I had a wonderful title. I was called Mozzo di Cucina, which means the rag of the kitchen, literally. And so, being on the ship was not really a wonderful thing because, I was young and people mistreated me sometimes. And but I learned a lot, and I learned to defend myself. I learned to build myself up a little bit by exercising in the afternoon while everybody was sleeping. But in any case, we got to Philadelphia, and the crew normally, since I was younger, then I used to follow where the crew went. And this is the crew without the officers, of course, because the officers were always separated from the rest of the crew. And so I followed the crew, and they decided to go to a place which was called the Track. Track is short for Trocadero, and it was a place where they show burlesque. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know what burlesque was, but I went in with the rest of the crew, and we were watching. It was somewhat interesting for me at that time. And I thought that because of the lack of knowledge, I thought that everybody in the United States spoke English. But I heard someone in the back speaking in Italian. I said, my gosh, what is that? So in a short time, we just got to talk to each other. And I met, his name was Luigi Borriello. And he told me very quickly that he had jumped a ship 6 months prior to that night. And he said, why don't you stay here? America is great. And I said, no, I'm going to go back home to my family. But in any case, when we got out, he walked with us all the way back to the ship. We walked back. It was about maybe a couple of miles, maybe 3. And so he said, but listen, if in case you change your mind, I work for Joe Bucci restaurant. So it's Joe Bucci Pizzeria. And it's on 9th and Washington Avenue in South Philadelphia. And if you decide to, I'll try to get you a job. I said, forget that. I'm never going to do it. Then when I got on the ship, I lied down in my little cabin and with 3 other folks. And I couldn't fall asleep. I just kept thinking about what he said to me, and so I was going back and forth. Should I do it? Should I not do it? But finally, at about 3:30, I made the decision that I was going to jump the ship.
And stay, yeah.
So jumping is, in the old days when they say jumping, that means that you just left the ship and dove into the water and then, got to land. But I walked off the ship. And the fellow that slept below me just said, I'm going to tell the captain and this and that. So I decided that I had to take my destiny into my own hands. So I kicked him and he shut up. And I had a little piece of luggage made of leather that actually belonged to my father. And so I went up on the deck, and the first officer was there. So he said, he used to call me, he never called me by the first name, he's always Scalco. Scalco, where are you doing? Where are you going? So I tried to explain to him that I couldn't bear it anymore, and I had to get off. So, but he actually knew my dad, and he said, you can't do that to your father. Well, we talked a little bit, and then finally he said, listen, he said, I have two choices here. Either I'll let you go, or we had a little cabin, which was a jail on the ship. And if in case somebody misbehaved, they put them in there. Well, I could put you in jail. But I said, since I know your dad, I'm gonna let you go. So I left, I went down on the dock, and the immigration officers were there, and so they rifled through the luggage, going through even my shaving kit. They were gonna shave. I had about 3 hairs, so, but I shaved. I felt like a man when I shaved. But so they were afraid that I was taking maybe some drugs with me or something like that, and I really hate to lie, but I lied at that time, because they said, listen, the ship is leaving tomorrow, and where are you going? I said, well, I have an aunt who lives in Philadelphia, and I'll be sure to be back on the ship. And so they said, where does she live? And I made up something, some address. So they let me go, and they actually even called me a cab. And when I got into the cab, I said, I couldn't speak English, obviously. I learned, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 words, I knew how to say, how do you do? Thank you, and hello. A few words. So I tried to explain to the cab driver to take me to the nearest hotel. But it has to be inexpensive, because I only had $18 in my pocket. So he took me to the nearest hotel. I remember it was on Spruce Street, near, I think, 8th or 9th. And I got a room there, and I think it was $10, $8 or $10. But I only had $18 in my pocket, so I said, my gosh, things are expensive here. And so I got up, I think it was on the 3rd floor, it was a very dingy room, and but a lot better than my cabin, that's for sure. And I was up all night, because in the city like Philadelphia, the police cars are running back and forth all the time, or the fire trucks, so the sirens were going, and every time I would hear the sirens, oh my God, they're coming after me. Yeah, and so it was a terrible night. So the next morning, I just I got up and I tried, said, okay, 9th and Washington Avenue. I remember, it was printed into my mandala that that was the place to go. And I tried to find my way to that. And but I'd like to tell you a little detail about my first encounter with. So how do you get to 9th and Washington Avenue? I was trying to say that in Italian. I had a little grammar book with me. And I said, first thing I said, how do you do? And this man, in South Philly, they talk a little different. He said, what do you say? I said, how do you do? So here we say, son of a bitch.
Oh no.
So I said, oh, son of a bitch. I said, yeah. So then he showed me how to get there, and so you go down 10th Street, then you go to Washington Avenue, then you make a left, and then he said, so the next street should be 9th Street, and it should be right there. And 9th Street is I think it's the oldest Italian market in the country. That was, I think they started in 1880, 1890, something like that. So I found a restaurant. I said, Joe Bucci's Pizzeria. And so I went in there, and there was a restaurant, and there was a large bar in the center. It was square, very large, and tables, and then there was a window on 9th Street. So 9th Street, again, it was the market street where lots of people went back and forth. And it's an outdoor market. So they have stores, and then they put the vegetables and goods outside on benches, and that's how they sell their goods. And so there was this window here, and that's where they made the pizza, right at the window. So I went in, there was, sitting at the bar, the first thing that really struck me was there was a very, very large man. He probably was 6'2" or 3", but very large. I would say now, thinking about that, he probably may have been over 300 pounds. And so he says something like, what do you want? I said, son of a bitch.
No.
And he got up from, he was a big man, but he got off the stool, at the bar stool. He got up so quickly, I thought he was, a gazelle. And he started yelling, and it was bad. It was so bad that I started crying. And there was a waitress there, and I found later I found that her name was Giovanna. She had dark green glasses, dark hair, and so she finally pulled me over to her table, and she tried to comfort me a little bit. So when I tried to explain that I was looking for Luigi Borriello, and they said, he doesn't work here. I don't know any Luigi Borriello. So I said to myself, oh my God. What do I do now? I don't know anybody. I don't know the language. What do I do? And the ship is going to leave. So, but fortunately, Giovanna was helping me a little bit. I found out that she spoke Italian, and the Southern Italian dialect. Then I found out later on that even Joe Bucci spoke Italian. His family was from Abruzzi. And so it took a while, probably 45 minutes, maybe an hour, I don't know. But all of a sudden, here comes Luigi Borriello. So I think that what Joe Bucci thought that I was a plant, because there were a lot of illegal immigrants at that time, and Eisenhower wanted to send them all back, and he thought of maybe an immigration officer planted me there to see if they had any illegals there. That's what I surmised.
Mm-hmm.
But finally, Louis came out, and oh my God, just.
And you were able to get a job there?
Well, he
Yeah.
talked to Joe Bucci, said, I'll give you a job, and I'll give you a big pay, $18 a week, 12 hours a day, 6 days. Yeah, Mondays off. And so great. So I was really happy about that, but just the head wasn't, was thinking about everything possible that was negative, So, but Luigi helped me to get a room on 10th Street, 10th near Wharton Street. It was between Federal and Wharton. So it was about 5 blocks away from the restaurant. And I had a letter with me that my father gave me before I left. The letter was from the small island in the Adriatic, was part of Dalmatia, which is the eastern part of Croatia on the Adriatic Sea. And the letter said that, apparently it was very vague, but my father told me one day that he had saved his life. And he then immigrated to America, he went to San Francisco, and he built a cordage business, a maritime cordage and ropes for ships, and he was doing very well. And he was telling my father, anytime you want to come here, the door is always open. So my father gave me that letter, thinking if in case, he said, don't ever do that, but something like that. But if in case you find a better world, is the letter.
Yeah.
So after a few days, I sent a telegram, and I never heard back from him. Never. Sent another telegram.
So at that point, you felt like you're on your own, and you have to make it here, in America,
Yeah, that was, it was like, traversing the Rubicon. Just, I said to myself in Latin, I said, "Dada jacta sunt." The die is cast. That's what you do.
And that's you move on from where you are. Yeah, right. That's very amazing. Amazing story, and I'm sure it's very emotional and difficult for you back then. And
I'm sorry about this, but I can't help it.
No. I mean, and I'm amazed how you remember so many details from back then. It's probably because it made such an impression. Coming, like, it's such a you've been put in this difficult situation, and you have to make it. So that reminds me also about very, very similar. Not as hard. I didn't go through a war, but when I came to America in the 90s, I escaped a very difficult economic situation in my country. So when you were talking about coming here in Philadelphia in Christmas, and everybody's like dressed very festive, and in Baltimore, okay, that's right. So very festive, and everybody's greeting each other. I had the same experience. I came to Belmont, California, and I'm out looking for a job, and everybody's happy, everybody's greeting each other, everybody's smiling in the sunshine, and I left the same gray, dark, everybody was talking about how they don't have a job, they are sick, and their kids are this. So for me, America was also, like a sunshine, like you going
Yeah.
into a fairy tale. It was a fairy tale for a long time for me. Like I couldn't, I felt like I was sleeping, dreaming, for a while.
I agree. The
Yeah.
fairy tale was in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
In Philadelphia, I tell you, after a little bit, I saw that everything was more expensive. The room was $10 a week, and I made $18, and so there was a lot of things, a lot of adjustments, and then I went into a little bit of a depression. I think that looking back now, I think it was a depression, and I just the room that I had was with an open wall, so people would by the stairs and they could look in, and I just it was just a very bad beginning, but the saving grace was work, going to work, because of all my years in this country, there was only one person that was, maybe two, not good to me. Everybody else that I met, by the thousands, everybody always tried to help, and they were courteous and gentle, and so that was, to me, that's how I would look Americans, from my experience.
Yeah.
And so, I know it was difficult, but without all those angels that helped me,
Yeah.
you could never do it, right?
Yeah. I had a similar experience too. Everybody has been helpful. But once in a while, you meet someone who's just either jealous or whatever, but then you just don't connect with them anymore, and move on. Yeah. Well, thank you for telling us this story, and this is just one of the stories that's in the book. This book is full of so many events from George's since he was born, from since he was born, history about his family, and also coming to America, then meeting his wife, and then having children, and their whole life, about him also going to college and getting a science degree, which is also amazing, because you came here without knowing any English, and all of a sudden you become a physicist. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, all of a sudden, wow.
I mean,
Diana, it was a long sudden.
Maybe all of a sudden, but from coming from not knowing a word of English.
I understand what you mean.
And then going to college and finishing a degree in physics, that's a big deal. So so I'm just saying, you have to read this book, and also thank you for watching this interview. Thank you, George. Thank you for agreeing, and then for having this. And I hope you use this interview also for yourself, and also for your memory, so your children and grandchildren can have it also of you. Just not just the book, but it's for you and your family. So thank you.
Well, I want to thank you, and I really appreciate it. I didn't know this was really going to be this, because the older you get, the more emotional you get. And so whenever I go back and think about those things, I said, gee, I relived them. It's not a question, it's just talk about it, just
Yeah.
you go through it again.
But thank you, I appreciate it.
But I appreciate America most of all.
Yeah.
And my wife and family.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And with that, that concludes this interview with George Scalco. He's the author of Leap of Faith. This book is on Amazon, and I'll put the link there in the description where you can also purchase it and read it for yourself. And with that, thank you so much.